All right, we're going to try to do this one more time, just like we did prior in the last 2 weeks. It got uploaded. Many of you got a chance to see it. So we're going to try this again. Thanks for coming. I'm James Detroit, and we're here with 6 different gentlemen, and I appreciate each of your time. I really do. I thank you for spending time together, and then we can have conversations like this. The thing I would like to start with today, the challenges that we are faced with. I'm a person of faith. Many of you here are people of faith. I know that God is in control. Now, does that mean that it's going to work out the way I think everything should work out? Well, I can't say that. I know what my worldview is. Let's go back in time. Let's talk about 2016. Let's talk about the media, the pundits, the polls. They were all wrong. They told us that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president. And yet, we, the people, voted for Donald Trump. Throughout the next 4 years, 3 and change, all they did, they being the left, the progressives, the Democratic Party, attempted to undo a duly elected president, undo the election of a duly elected president in the United States of America. Russia, the Ukraine, whether or not he had consensual sex with a woman and improper campaign funds went to hush her up. That Democratic National Party, the lefts and the progressives, never cared once about a Democratic president that raped women before, during, and after the presidency. So now all of a sudden we have a double standard. No, it's not all of a sudden. I've been saying this forever. This country, the greatest country ever created, of the people, by the people, for the people, individual rights, free will, has been in constant battle between what I would call good and evil for over 250 years. Take us to 2020. They told us that a blue wave was going to come across this nation. And it didn't happen again. They told us, I've got the article right up there, that on the election eve, Joe Biden was 10 points ahead across the country, that the Senate would be taken by the Democrats, the House would increase seats, and Joe Biden would be elected president in a landslide electoral victory. None of that happened. They were wrong again. And if we really think about how we get into these numbers, if we really think about the things that you and I were just talking about prior to hitting record on this, what is it that we notice? Only in Democratic states and in Democratic-run cities, Democratic mayors, are we having these issues. Now again, California, New York, Illinois, do we believe in Massachusetts and Boston and Los Angeles and in Chicago that there is fraud? Yeah, there's been systemic fraud for years. Tammany Hall, every single one of us in this room, in our history books in high school, read about, in our civics class, Tammany Hall. What was it? It was a way that you controlled the government of New York City, of Boston. These were things that were happening in Chicago. We joked about it before for years. In Chicago, in Massachusetts, Democrats vote early and often, and we joked around about it. It's funny. It's not so funny anymore, is it? And if we think about these historical corrupt records in these cities, I'm going to tell you right now, when I see Van Jones on television accusing our president of being a racist because he's calling out the corruption in Philadelphia and Detroit, Van Jones is the racist. Van Jones is a racist for saying that. Van Jones, do you live in Detroit? Every one of us that lives in Michigan knows full well Detroit has a history of corruption. Why do you think Kwame Kilpatrick went to prison? This isn't a racist statement to say that Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta, New York, Boston, Chicago, that there's corruption? You, Van Jones, is a racist for saying that the president pointing out the obvious corruption is racist. That's a racist statement, Van Jones. So what have we seen play out? Well, they have said for years that if the presidential candidates move the needle with the black or Hispanic vote 1% to 2%, that's the difference in the election. They said that for years. And what have we seen here? Well, more blacks and Hispanics have voted for President Trump than ever. The Edison poll, and this is between 3% and 6%, with women, LGBTQ, Hispanics, and blacks. Well, if that's the case from the Edison poll, and again, I just talked about how the pollsters were wrong, but Trafalgar was not wrong. That is a different poll. And what did they have going into election? Trafalgar had an electoral landslide for President Trump in these battleground states, which then flips everything for him, and he wins handily. How is it that Trafalgar was correct in 16, had similar data points to show in 2020, the other groups were completely wrong, the other polls were completely wrong, and then let's think about a couple other things. They told us that you had unprecedented early voting. Over 110 million people voted early, is what they told us. Okay, the latest numbers suggest somewhere around 75 million to 73 million votes, somewhere in that ballpark. That's what it's projected to come in at. An historically high number for voting. Okay. And they say that President Trump is divisive. He's unified this country into doing one thing, and that's voting more than anything. I just mentioned more black, Hispanic, increase with women and LGBTQ. This president united those groups. If we actually had legitimate early votes of 110 million people before Tuesday, that means that we only had about 55 million people vote on Tuesday? That would be extremely low. And I've asked each one of you in this room, what did the polls look like when you went and voted? Was it substantially less crowded? And to a man, everybody said, no, actually, it was just as crowded or more crowded, and that's what the pollsters were even talking about. So where are those votes, and what votes were the 110 early ones? Where did those votes come from? Just in our conversation right now, we've been talking about the number of people that we know that have dead people in their family receiving multiple absentee ballots. I'll give you Lyle Ide. My wife's grandfather died in 1980. No one has tried to call that house asking for Lyle Ide in 40 years until just this year, in the last 3 months. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence that the number of people that we all know, and it's more than we can count on our hands and toes, that have received stimulus checks from people that are already dead, that have received absentee ballots for people that no longer live in this state and or are already dead? And when we look around this state, do we think for 1 second that a state that won, that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 by 2 or 3 points, whatever it was, that it turned and went to Joe Biden? The enthusiasm that we saw for this campaign was beyond what it was in 2016. We all see, we all know, we can't hardly find but a few people, and I do know a few people that voted for Biden. I know a few people that couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump. And yet this is where we're at. I'll say this, if you go through this countryside and you see in the state of Michigan, the enthusiasm for Donald Trump is far greater than it was in 2016. Just nod your head if you agree with me. We all agree. Barack Obama and Joe Biden showed up the Saturday before the election, last Saturday, in the city of Flint, a Democratic stronghold. And by all accounts, the crowd that was at Williams and Davison for Donald Trump Jr. and Ted Nugent was 2 times greater. And you're going to tell me that all these people voted for Joe Biden? We call it when we watch 2 football teams in college and they don't get a chance to play the others, we're trying to figure out who's better. We call it the eye test. We're athletes, we've all played the game. You're just watching guys run around. The eye test to every one of us in this room and to the majority of people in Michigan is that Michigan didn't vote for Joe Biden. Now, it's not that I'm a poor loser, and it's not that Donald Trump's a poor loser. It's not that it's sour milk. It's the fact that against the law, these votes have been counted in the state of Michigan. The law states that you need to have bipartisan approval of any any votes that are contentious. If there's any discrepancy at all. I used it this morning, and I have heard it before, but it's a very good. Ted Cruz used it last night, and I'll use it again right now. If I'm going to cut the power to the bank, spray paint the alarm system, the cameras, spray paint the windows, and then go in that door, do you think I'm just going to deposit a check? Or do you think I'm trying to take money out of there? If the Democrats had nothing to hide in any of these cities and any of these states, then why aren't they allowing the legal process to play out? If you have nothing to hide, then why aren't you allowing bipartisan approval of all of these ballots that are suspect? And in this state, the governor and the Secretary of State is beyond suspect. And I've got an answer for that. As dire as this might sound, America is still here. That is what we can be still placing our hope in. America is still here. This blue wave that didn't happen, these states that actually picked up more House of Representatives for the Republican Party, they didn't win the Senate. They're not going to win the Senate. If ever there's a person that has a complaint, I think it's John James. So you're telling me in the state of Michigan, I'm pretty sure, I'm not certain, but we got rid of Cheryl Kennedy and got Dave Martin in. We got rid of Brian Elder in Bay City and got in Beeson. And I don't know how many more Michigan House seats went from incumbent Democrats to Republicans. But you're going to tell me in Bay City and in this district here, the 48th district, you're going to tell me we split a ticket? We voted for Biden, but then we voted for David Martin, and we voted for Biden in Bay City, but we voted for Beeson. We didn't vote. If you start thinking about these irregularities, you can stop assuming or accusing me of being a conspiracy theorist, and you can start to say, there might be something to this. When Antrim County goes 68% for Trump in 2016, and now is 68% for Biden in 2020, and the county only has 28,000 people, and like, we need to look at this. Because I do think that there is a larger evil in play here than just the mechanics of human beings in the state of Michigan. America, of the people, by the people, for the people, is not without a great deal of effort to maintain it. What I sent many of you last night, I'll read again. The Sam Adams quote. The liberties of our country, the freedoms of our civil constitution are worth defending at all hazards. It is our duty to defend them against all attacks. We have received them as a fair inheritance from our worthy ancestors. They purchased them for us with toil and danger and expense of treasure and blood. It will bring a mark of everlasting infamy on the present generation, enlightened as it is, if we should suffer them to be wrestled from us by violence without a struggle, or to be cheated out of them by the artifices of designing men. End quote. That, my friend, is a man you'll be hard to find in today's society, writing any idea like that, sharing it with fellow Americans. That is what we need to hold on to. The creators of this country, ordained and empowered by the Holy Spirit, created this nation, the greatest country ever, has provided more prosperity for all humans across the globe than any other country. And the progressives and the left, and as far as I'm concerned, the Democratic Party wants to destroy it and create a socialist utopia. It's failed everywhere in the world it's ever been attempted. How is it possible that we are at this point right now? Well, again, a man of faith believes we are supposed to be here. This is a time that we have been chosen for. And we do need to fight. We do need to fight to keep this. The fight first is through the legal process. We just talked about it a minute ago. The 14th Amendment. I'm going to read it to you right now. Everybody should have their own little pocket constitution.
Keep it in my glove box.
Yeah. I mean, if you're ever just bored going through the car wash or whatever, and you think, I wonder what the 14th Amendment says. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Let me translate. If you are part of an insurrectionist act to try to dissolve the Union of the United States of America, you are in violation of federal law, just as we have seen in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Atlanta. Violation of federal law. But it goes farther than that. I've asked a few of us to reach out to our state representatives. Why? I've been very critical of our state representatives for not standing up to the tyranny that was imposed upon us through this lockdown. I didn't feel like our representatives were doing enough to stop the governor from executive order hysteria. Well, now you have another chance. Now you have a chance to be able to go and stop this process. Those votes are still countable. We can verify through a bipartisan, and it needs to be pushed by the Michigan state reps. And obviously, all the Democrats are already bowing to the governor and to our Secretary of State. The governor of Michigan and the Secretary of State of Michigan is beyond suspect. This process needs to be believed by each of us and the other 10 million people that voted for Trump plus in this state. And it needs to be legitimate even for the other side. This is not a unifying process. This is becoming a more divisive process. And I think that's by design. I think it is by design by the people on the left, the progressives, and the anarchists. Now, do you believe that Michigan flipped? No, you don't. We need every legitimate and legal vote to count. What is an example? We've already seen the gentleman who's testified attempts at anonymity. He's had his face and his voice changed. He works for the Traverse City Postal Service. He was told by his bosses, his superiors, to separate ballots and postmark them for the 3rd so that they can still be counted. Where did those ballots come from? Do the signatures match? I know that when I went to the poll here in Michigan, I had to show my ID, and the signature on my ID needed to match the signature of the ballot request that I just filled out. I don't understand why that's a problem for anybody. If you and every legal American citizen should get registered to vote. But if you haven't gone through the process to get legal to vote, take care of your own business, then you don't deserve to this time. Do it next time. This idea that equality, not under the law, just equal outcomes, that's not right. Let me finish up by saying I hope I'm wrong. I've been saying for months that this exact scenario was going to play out. I've been saying for months that in battleground states, you're going to have whatever's needed to get turned in, and it's going to come through all of these votes, all of these things that were already filled out, sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Okay, how close is it going to be? And the reason why they need to kind of know is because their informants, their pollsters, had it so wrong in 2016 they weren't for sure. Do you think it's a coincidence that in these major cities that a lot of the voting tallies stopped at a certain time on the same day, November 3rd? Again, you might just say, "Oh, James, you're a conspiracy theorist. Here you go again." Okay. I hope I'm wrong, though. If Donald Trump does not win this, and the 70 plus million Americans that legitimately voted for him and did it out of love and appreciation for what this man has done, sacrificed for this country, as I just mentioned, Sam Adams wrote about 200 plus years ago. We have love and appreciation for this man. The other side, you have hate. So I hope that I'm wrong. That the other side, that Joe Biden would be a moderate. They didn't get the Senate, so they can't get rid of the filibuster. They can't just throw the states in if they wanted to. They lost some of their majority in the House. Even if Joe Biden gets in, and even if he made it through a whole first term, which I really doubt he will, I hope I'm wrong that they'll hold the line to moderation to try to unify the country. I've been right about so many other things, though. I do have some fearfulness that that wouldn't happen. But as I said before, I am a man of faith. And I do know that God is in control. And I look back into the Bible, I have to go no further. Israel, God's own people, because they turned away from God, were allowed to be controlled and ruled by others. Not just once, over and over and over again. We have an opportunity right now to, as a nation, as a nation of patriots, of the people, by the people, for the people, individual rights, free will, recognizing we need to take back our country as it was created. If you see there are a number of Democratic U.S. Congress people that are pissed off because defund the police and all these radical socialist ideas almost lost them their reelection. And they're like, you know what? We need to start, and in this county is to Chris Swanson's credit when he says, I'm a Democrat. He believes in the sanctity of life. He believes in pro-Second Amendment. Okay. Then be more, and don't listen to people in Lansing, and don't listen to people in Washington. Don't get your orders from them. Then be a responsible citizen of this county. Let this play out legally. Let's see where this goes. There is going to be a time, because I've said it. I've apologized to my children for years for not being in the streets. Something tells me we're going to need to take every action necessary to keep our republic. And I want it to be as peaceful as possible. I thought we could do it through the voting process. They're attempting to steal that process from us. The legitimacy of elections needs to be acknowledged by both sides. And it can only be done if you have bipartisan oversight. There needs to be bipartisan transparency. And one last thought. I'm not going to get up and walk over to all those articles that we printed off this week. But there's some fantastic ones in there. This is 2020. Why is it that we can contact trace people with these phones that I'm taping this with right now? Why is it that we have all of this technology, and yet you can't figure out a way to get these votes counted in a timely manner? Isn't that probably by design? Now, this is a conspiracy theorist here, is what you're going to call me. But we know when there's bad lettuce and strawberries, for goodness sakes, and we can track them and get rid of them. I heard it said last night, we can control the rover on Mars 140 million miles away, but we can't get votes counted. And then I'm just going to ask one more question before I start taking some questions from you. Is it possible that for the first time ever, there is a re-election or a redo on the election in certain states? Obviously, we don't need to go to California, Oregon, or Washington. We don't need to go to New Mexico. We don't need to go to Colorado. We don't need to go to Illinois, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Rhode Island, Vermont. We don't need to go to any of those places. There's really 5 states that there's so many questions in the balance of this presidential election and so much of where our country is headed is held in the balance. All right, I'm going to start taking some questions because I know there's a couple of them. Yes.
So, a couple of things. One, is it inconceivable that Senate and House Republican seats are gained and that other people, like you said, would vote for Biden as president and those others for Senate, even the state of Michigan, for instance, picks up more Republican stuff, and then we end up being a Democratic state. Is that possible, I guess? I mean, I guess it could be possible as one. Two, if we knew these polls and the voting were such an issue, and always kind of have been an issue going back to 2000, right, and that mess, why would we not rectify that? And somebody, and I may default Trump, but somebody go to Silicon Valley and say, new way, we need to figure out a new way to do elections to make it sleek, easy, more accountable, whatever. How come we don't address that until after, like now?
So the two questions you just asked were, number one, is it conceivable, especially in the state of Michigan or any of these other states that are in question, that people would vote and split their ticket, vote for Biden, but then go ahead and pick up Republican seats in the House, in the State House, as well as in the House of Representatives for Congress and the Senate? Is that conceivable? Again, I think you're asking a question you already have the answer to. You find it inconceivable. That's why it's so important to have these states, the votes counted accurately and all the legal votes counted accurately, not just the votes counted accurately, the legal and legitimate votes. And the other thing is, why can't we, to the answer to the question I have, it's 2020, why can't we have the technology to make this more efficient, more transparent? I don't think they want it. I think that they, being the left and the progressives, they want as much chaos as possible so that they can have as much control as possible. That's my opinion. Bob.
Well, the question I had, and I'm going to throw a little something out there that's kind of along those lines with the voting processes. We get caught up in all these ballots out there, but we're to be counting votes, not ballots. Let's make sure that we understand there's a distinction between those two. A vote is somebody that actually voted and put their choice down. A ballot is just an opportunity for someone to put their opinion down.
Okay,
So,
I just want to comment. Let me comment on that right there. So the difference between ballots and legitimate votes,
Right.
which is what we get back to, every legal and legitimate vote should count.
Right. Legal ballot.
Just counting ballots
Right.
is a whole different thing. And because I equate this to the coronavirus. When I have very good friends, we have very good friends, close people, that think I'm nuts if I don't think that the coronavirus has already killed over 220,000 people in America. And I say, well, it doesn't look like that's the facts. And so counting ballots and just counting coronavirus death cases when we're not doing the autopsies, we're not, and this is in the peak of, right? Aaron, this is in the peak of the pandemic deaths accredited in Genesee County. And we talked to the Genesee County Coroner's Office saying, wow, you guys are overwhelmed, right? No,
Medical examiner.
the medical examiner, not even doing them. Why? It's just the hospitals get the money for checking the box, COVID patient, COVID death. You get more money.
And it is acknowledged in the hospital that no matter what your ailment is that caused your death. That if you had COVID
Or symptoms of.
Yeah. You got hit by a bus, but because you tested positive for COVID, which all of us are supposedly going to, at some point we're going to have it.
Last month, the CDC changed their numbers to say that of all the deaths, only 6%
Actually, we're
were
from COVID.
Actual COVID
Yeah.
alone. Every other death in that list.
Yeah, so
had
6%.
Comorbidity.
The CDC's numbers, 6% actually was the deaths from COVID. And yet, our good friends won't even acknowledge the CDC's own numbers. And let me just throw this in real quick before I get to your next question. Because I've said this before, I'll say it right now. The Michigan Health Department's numbers through the height of the pandemic for people 14 years of age and younger accredit one death in the state of Michigan to COVID. That death could be the young lady whose baby died with the organs on the outside of her body, who was on Facebook screaming furiously, "My baby's been attributed as a COVID death. My baby did not die from COVID." And she was asking for that to be changed. We don't know if they ever changed it, but let's just say that, the Michigan Department of Health's own number through July, 14 and under was one death accredited to COVID. And we know that their number is 8 deaths accredited to the flu. That means, by Michigan Health Department's own numbers, through July, the flu was 8 times more deadly to people in this state 14 years and younger. The only way that becomes disputable is if they change that number. And watch them change that number. It's just too obvious. Thank you for MishCon for bringing that information to me. I'll give them the credit. Bob, you've got another question.
And it's just Aaron already touched on it about the voting process, but in listening to Rush yesterday, he said something that I just burst out laughing as I'm driving. He says, "We can watch Dancing with the Stars if you choose to on Monday nights." He says, "and we can throw in 130 million votes in 5 minutes and have a calculation of that." He said, "We can't vote as a country in a day and get anywhere close to that calculated. How is that not possible? How is it that we don't have a system?" And kind of went off on what you had said, says, we don't want it.
Right.
It's the reason that it doesn't exist. And, the back to the thing with the pollsters of, what do we think of the pollsters? And there it said, we all came through 2016 and thought, wow, these guys are just horrible. And we've read lots of things about, well, the pollsters' numbers are really, their credibility is on the line in 2020. And again, listening to Rush, he said, that's the biggest fallacy there is out there. He said, these people don't care. He said, they were wrong on purpose, not by accident, not by, faulty.
It's by design to try to influence, the pollsters are wrong, by design to try to influence the outcome of the election, ahead of the election. And as you were pointing out, 135 million votes can be taken on Dancing with the Stars. And I'm not saying that, again, we would want that process necessarily for this, but we do know the technology is available. I personally think, in my precinct, the way I go through it, it actually seemed to be pretty legitimate. My signature has to match, right? We have to show our license.
Fingerprints.
Oh, yeah.
I use my fingerprint
But
scanner.
that was one of my first
usually-
thoughts was the fingerprint thing, but to me, it has to be face recognition, because the fingerprint, anybody that, has been,
Yeah, but to lift it
been
and
pulled
apply
over.
it
No, I'm
was-
just,
Well, and let me just say, you guys are talking,
is what I'm saying.
you guys are talking about facial recognition and print recognition in order to be able to go up and vote. And all of these things lead to this tech tyranny that's going to happen at some point, only because it makes life easier for us. That's part of, I think, why we're where we're at right now, is that Silicon Valley is going to say, oh,